reaction. Most of it positive. There were some questions about it. Some argued that we hadn't made a strong enough case for the idea that academia has been muzzled in terms of criticism of Islam, and that the idea that the universities have been flooded with money from Muslim countries didn't have any influence at all. That was one argument that we saw. And so I thought I'd come back to it. One of the claims I made during the video was the fact that the idea that the historical critique took a dip during the 20th century. And one individual questioned that, and basically, I think, thought I was just, this is my own personal opinion and not based on anything and not based on evidence from the experience of scholars. So I thought I'd come back to it. Where did I come up with this idea? Well, it's from the book A Challenge to Islam for Reformation by Gunter Luling. I have a synopsis here, and it was in the introduction to it, where it's mentioned this idea of that Islamic studies were quite critical around the turn of the century. So talking about the 1900s, and then it just tailed off. People lost interest, and then people like Luling basically picked up where people left off many years before. So that's where it's based on. But I've heard similar ideas from a number of scholars. Unfortunately, I can't remember every single one, but I'm going to give you this one and another one today. So unfortunately, I don't have the book with me, and I will come back to it. Just from the synopsis here, it gives us an idea of what we're talking about. The author stumbled across the fact that around 1900, some renowned German Islamists already discussed the important circumstance that the Qur'an contained a comprehensive vernacular Arabic strophic poetry. These studies became instantly deserted and showed no interest at all in dogma critical text criticism. The author succeeded in developing these forgotten studies of around the turn of the century to become an achievement. The proof is established that the pre-Islamic Christian hymnody contained in the Quran under early Quranic interpretations can be reliably reconstructed. So essentially, he gave the background to his work, that actually people did look at this, and then it was dropped and scholars lost interest. And it's literally after decades and decades of zero work on this area that he came back to looking at it again. Now, to go a little bit further into this, I want to talk a little bit more about Luling. So just a little bit in terms of basic information. He was born in 1928, died in 2014. He was a German Protestant theologian, philological scholar, and pioneer in the study of early Islamic origins. From 1962 to 1965, he was director of the German Goethe Institute in Aleppo, Syria. So no slouch. He was a student of Albert Schweitzer and Martin Werner. He attempted to demonstrate the textual link between pre-Islamic Christian hymnody in the Middle East and the composition of the Qur'an. Let's just move on to the dispute. According to Alan Dundes, in 1970, Luling submitted a doctoral dissertation which suggested that the Quran contained evidence of traces of poetic strophic, i.e., verse repeating or chorus form, a song structure in which all verses or stanzas of the text are sung to the same music, as opposed to through composed where new music is written for every stanza text. Dundes writes that Luling's view was not in accord with orthodox Islamic tradition. Okay, this might be kind of important here. And by 1972, he was officially dismissed from the University of Erlangen, where he had submitted his thesis. Now, in case someone might think, well, clearly it must have been a rubbish thesis. He got the highest grade possible for his thesis, but he still got dismissed. A lawsuit filed overturned the dismissal, carried on for 6 years, but did not succeed in reversing the university's action. Now, why would the university take such a drastic action? Surely it believes in academic freedom. Now, if it is the case, and I think we've met the case that an awful lot of money was at stake for universities, then we can see a strong enough reason for such a good scholar being dismissed. They did not want to rock the boat. This original doctoral thesis was subsequently published in a book which he could not get published in the West and eventually was published in India. I believe J. Smith had a hand and part in getting this translated. So we can thank J. Smith for this, but he almost was forgotten about his work and so on, but he thankfully got the book back in print. Okay, so that's one piece of evidence. There's quite a lot in that, really. So the point about critical studies kind of dipping during the 20th century. The point it was making is not that it disappeared entirely. That's not the point. It's just that it dipped significantly, and things were kind of there were studies that were carried on with fascinating possibilities that were not touched then for decades, and there's multiple reasons for that. That's the first thing, but also we see the consequences for scholars for speaking out, for taking on controversial work like this. They get punished. Gunter Luling is one of the top scholars, and he got severely punished for his work. So another place where we see the same point made is in J Shoemaker's recent book, Creating the Qur'an, Historical Critical Study. So he actually doesn't point the finger at the money trail. He basically points the finger at a particular scholar who had an influence on academia. That's part of the reason for the quietening of the historical critique of Islam, but I don't think it's the full picture. But it's still important. That I think the most important thing is not is it the money? Is it down to one individual, or is it a collection of individuals? It's really the point of all of this is the fact that Islam got an easy ride during the 20th century. It was treated with velvet gloves, and we're still seeing that today. We give an example of Dr. Anthony, Sean Anthony, and how he was trying to salvage the hadiths and the seerah from the historical critique. So that's just an example of the bending over backwards to please the Islamic masters and all of this. Okay, so let's take a look from his book. This is page 3 of the book just mentioned, Creating the Qur'an. As in the introduction, page 3. He says, there is, of course, a long-standing tendency within religious studies itself that would insist on privileging insider perspectives and would refrain from any sort of explanation that could be considered reductive or that believers could find objectionable. As Bruce Lincoln Riley observes, it is often the case that, with the possible exception of economics, ours, religious studies is the only academic field that is effectively organized to protect its putative object of study against critical examination. This trajectory has, in fact, had a particularly notable impact on the study of Islam, as it would eventually enter religious studies departments owing, in large part, to the outsize influence of Wilfred Cantrell Smith on the study of Islam during the latter half of the 20th century. So this is we're looking now at the American experience. We saw what happened in the German world, what happened to Luling. So it was also happening across the other side of the Atlantic. According to Smith's approach to the study of religion, for any statement about a given religious tradition to be valid, it must be recognized as such and accepted by members of that religious community. Therefore, in order to come to any valid understanding of the Qur'an, according to Smith, one must approach the text as a believing Muslim would and seek to understand it on this basis. Do you get that? Smith's tradition of deference to the beliefs of religious adherents and his views regarding the Quran in particular have cast a long shadow on the subsequent study of Islam, particularly in North America, where a concern to accommodate the convictions of believers remains widespread. So we saw in earlier videos that in 1910 the term Islamophobia was introduced, and here we can see the same sort of political correctness interfering with an objective study of the origins of Islam. And that's, you can't do that if you're trying to be honest in your studies. In 1951, Smith founded the Institute of Islamic Studies at McGill University in Montreal, and the subsequent influence of this institution and its graduates on the development of Islamic religious studies in North America is difficult to overestimate. Smith established this center and its doctoral program with the explicit aim of grounding the Western study of Islam by non-Muslims squarely within the perspectives of the Islamic tradition itself. In other words, it's all demarcated. You can't cross the red lines. Why? What are they afraid of? And who is influencing Smith to do this? Why would he want to do this? Surely, as a scholar, he would be interested in academics asking the tough questions and not just bowing to religious sensitivities. Indeed, the degree requirements for the Institute explicitly require that students earning the PhD must produce work that would maintain continuity with the Islamic tradition and must be relevant, significant, and cogent to members of this faith community. So it must produce work that would maintain continuity with the Islamic tradition. So in other words, you can't produce anything that's critical of the Islamic tradition, because if you do, it's not maintaining continuity with that tradition. So good luck getting a PhD if you push the boat out a little bit. In 1964, Smith left McGill with his designs for the Institute of Islamic Studies firmly ensconced and took up a position at Harvard University. Now, wasn't that one of the universities that got a big pile of money from Muslim countries? It was. Where he served as a director of the Harvard Divinity School Center for the Study of World Religions. Between these two prestigious appointments, Smith was able to direct the training and influence the methodological approach of many, if not the majority, of Islamists who held and continue to hold positions in religious studies departments in North America. Consequently, as the study of Islam entered North American religious studies departments, it was frequently colored by a deference to the religious views of certain contemporary Muslims, views that were allowed to control and direct the academic study of this religious tradition. Again, what are we seeing? We're seeing a deference towards religious tradition. We're not seeing academic freedom. Such broad acquiescence to the theological positions of a particular religious community is highly unusual and generally unwelcome in the academic study of religion. So, this is not something that is typical across the religions. This is something special to Islam. And the resulting tension between specialists on Islam and those who study just about any and every other religious tradition abides in many departments of religious studies. This issue can be particularly acute for those like myself who teach religious studies as a state public university. So he's telling us here, Mr. Shoemaker is telling us that all of this is putting pressure on lecturers to toe the line, to acquiesce, not to ask critical questions. So I think what myself and Lloyd de Young has been saying is backed up with the evidence. If my critic in the comments wants to challenge this further, we can keep going with this. We can produce even more evidence. In fact, I asked Lloyd to cut out about 64 additional slides of evidence that he had. I said to him it would take hours to go through it all. Just give us 6 or 7 pages, that of slides. That will do. That should be sufficient. But if our what's the word for it? Our opponent in the comment section would like us to go further into this, I'm more than happy to do so. So thank you for watching, and see you all again very soon. Bye bye.